I remember being 45. It didn't come with fireworks or a sudden shift. No loud signals telling me, "You've crossed into something new." It just arrived one morning, quietly, while I was brushing my teeth, staring at a face I'd seen for decades, and realizing I didn't quite recognize the man in the mirror. There wasn't anything wrong exactly. I had a job, family, a house with creaking floors and curtains that smelled faintly of old books and clean laundry. I had responsibilities stacked like dishes in the sink, never ending, always needing attention. But beneath all that, something had started to change. I didn't feel like myself, and I didn't know what that meant anymore. You see, when you're younger, your days are about becoming. You're reaching, climbing, pushing forward. You wear titles like armor, manager, husband, provider, and believe they define you. But somewhere in your 40s, the ladder stops feeling like it's going up. You're not climbing anymore. You're holding on. And that holding on is the first quiet crisis. I didn't talk to anyone about it. Who would I even tell? That I was scared of my own routine? That some mornings, I'd sit in my car for 5 extra minutes just to delay walking into the office, because it all felt like a performance I no longer believed in? The truth is, I wasn't tired from work. I was tired from pretending I wasn't tired. No one warns you about that kind of fatigue. It's not the kind that sleep fixes. It's a soul-deep quieting. A soft hum of discontent that lives under your skin, even on the best days. I remember a Sunday afternoon. My kids were playing in the backyard, and my wife was folding laundry while humming something old and familiar. And I stood at the kitchen sink, watching them through the window, and I felt completely apart. Not unloved, not ungrateful, just removed, like I was watching someone else's life. That disconnection is the second thing that sneaks in after 45. It doesn't come like a storm. It slips through the cracks when you're not paying attention. You can be in a room full of people you love and still feel like the furniture is more present than you are. It's not about failure. It's about fading. You fade in your own home. You become a background figure in your own memories. I used to think I was losing my edge, that I wasn't strong anymore because I didn't feel like arguing or pushing back at everything like I used to. But now, at 80, I see it differently. I wasn't losing strength. I was craving softness, place to rest. I didn't want to win anymore. I wanted peace, but I didn't know how to ask for that. Men like me weren't taught to say, "I feel hollow today," or "I miss myself." So we buy things, or chase new goals. We fill the void with motion and noise, but it doesn't quiet the ache. And then one day you wake up and realize you haven't heard your own laughter in a long time. That was the third shift. I stopped laughing, not because life wasn't funny, but because I'd lost the part of myself that laughed freely. That spontaneous spark of joy had been replaced by practicality. Everything became a to-do list. Even fun had to be scheduled. My youngest once told me I used to have a goofy voice I'd use for their stuffed animals when they were little. I couldn't remember it. It was like hearing a story about someone I'd never met. There's a grief in forgetting who you used to be, and that grief doesn't scream. It sighs. You carry it like an old coat you forgot you were wearing, heavy in the shoulders, familiar in the worst way. Sometimes it shows up in little things, like standing in the aisle at the hardware store and realizing you've been staring at paint cans for 15 minutes, not thinking about anything, just blank, drifting. It wasn't depression, at least not the clinical kind. It was something quieter, a soft erasing. And in that space, I began to feel invisible, not because others ignored me, but because I no longer knew how to see myself. I was surrounded by roles, but who was the man behind them? No one asked. And I didn't know how to tell them I'd forgotten. That's a kind of loneliness that sneaks into the seams of your days. It's polite, that loneliness. It doesn't crash in. It just sits in the corner and waits. If you're still here, leave me a comment. Tell me, did you ever feel like that too? Like you were living your own life, but at a slight distance? I'll be here listening. There was a moment, early one autumn morning, when I sat alone on the porch, coffee cooling in my hands, and the world was still. No emails, no meetings, no errands, Just the breath of trees shedding their leaves and the hush of a world not yet awake. And in that silence something stirred. Not a thought, not an idea, something simpler. A question. Do you even know what you want anymore? Startled me, because I didn't. For so many years, my wants had been replaced by needs. And then the needs became habits. And the habits became who I thought I was. But underneath it all, the boy who once dreamed, the young man who used to write poems in secret, the husband who used to kiss his wife mid-sentence just to see her smile, all of him had gone quiet. And that was the fourth turning, though I didn't know it then. You stop dreaming after 45. Not all at once. It's a slow silencing. The world starts telling you your time for dreaming has passed. That your job now is to maintain, to provide, to be realistic. And maybe it is. But nobody tells you that dreams don't die quietly. They haunt. They sit in your chest like unfinished songs, humming a tune you once loved but no longer remember the lyrics to. I remember looking at my guitar, once played every weekend, now gathering dust in the corner of the room. I hadn't touched it in years. I told myself I didn't have time, that it was childish, that music doesn't pay bills. But the truth? I was afraid of being a beginner again, afraid that I'd forgotten how to feel something just for myself. And when a man forgets how to feel for himself, that's a different kind of death. Not physical, but spiritual. Took me years to pick up that guitar again, and even longer to forgive myself for putting it down. I look back now and realize that so many of us, especially men, live half-lives after 45. Not because we've failed, but because no one teaches us how to begin again. We think midlife means settling down, but maybe it's just the start of a different kind of becoming. Still, it's hard to become anything when the weight of responsibility has rooted you in place. I felt trapped in routines I had built myself. Isn't that strange? We spend our youth fighting for freedom, only to create cages in our middle years. Comfortable ones, yes, but cages nonetheless. And I'll tell you something I learned the hard way. Stability can turn into stagnation without warning. It's not loud. It doesn't shout at you. It just shows up as numbness, as autopilot, as the kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful, it feels empty. I remember standing in the grocery store aisle, holding a box of cereal, and realizing I hadn't tasted anything in weeks. I'd been eating, drinking, talking, moving, but none of it had flavor. That's the fifth quiet crisis. The vanishing of presence. You become a ghost inside your own life. And the saddest part is, nobody notices, because on the outside you're doing everything right. You're responsible, reliable, predictable, but inside, you're just gone. I wish someone had told me back then, presence isn't something you earn by being useful. It's something you reclaim by being still. That porch, that coffee, that quiet October morning. I think that was the first time I truly met myself in years. Not the worker, not the father, not the man who mows the lawn or files the taxes. Just me. It was both beautiful and terrifying, because when the noise fades, you hear what you've been avoiding. Regrets, longings, a soft ache for something unnamed. And yet, it's in that ache that life begins again. I didn't know that at 45. I know it now, and I'm telling you because maybe you're feeling that ache, too. Maybe you're sitting at your desk, or driving to work, or lying in bed at 2 a.m. staring at the ceiling, wondering if this is all there is. It's not. But you have to listen, not to the world, to yourself. And that voice, the quiet one, the one you've ignored for years, it still remembers who you were, and it still believes in who you could become. That's not hope for the young. That's truth for the living, no matter the age. I used to think that strength meant pushing through, that a good man, the kind of man my father told me to be, didn't flinch, didn't waver, didn't need help, that we carried the weight alone, and if it got heavy, we just got stronger. But around my late 40s, that definition started to crack. I was still holding everything up, career, family, mortgage, the invisible pressure to always be okay. But I was no longer sure why I was doing it, or for whom. One afternoon, I found myself in a parking lot, gripping the steering wheel long after the engine had turned off. couldn't go inside, couldn't walk into the house. Not because I didn't love them, but because I didn't know how to be with them while feeling so far from myself. And that was the sixth quiet crisis, disconnection from intimacy. Not just physical intimacy, though that fades too more quietly than you expect. No, I mean the intimacy of being seen, of sharing a thought without wrapping it in armor, of admitting, I'm not sure who I am these days, and having someone say, I see you anyway. Men like me, we weren't raised to be seen. We were raised to be useful. And when usefulness becomes your identity, love starts to feel like a transaction. You give and give and give, and when the giving gets hard, you retreat. Because rest feels like weakness. Because receiving feels foreign. I loved my wife. Still do, even now, though her picture is the only thing left on the nightstand. But back then, I didn't know how to let her in. We shared the same roof, same bed, same breakfast table. But we were speaking different languages. Hers was warmth. Mine was silence. Not angry silence, just the kind that comes from being lost and not wanting anyone to follow. Looking back, I wish I'd known that intimacy doesn't begin with being understood. It begins with the courage to be uncertain and the grace to let someone witness that uncertainty. There were days she reached for me, not with hands, but with kindness. A soft question, a long look, a touch that lingered, and I answered with a smile and a deflection. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't believe I deserved her concern if I didn't have answers to offer in return. God, how much we miss in life because we're afraid of being unfinished. It's a strange thing, to be married for years, to raise children, to build a life brick by brick, and still feel like a stranger walking through your own home. And the children, well, they grow faster than you expect. There's a day when you're tying shoelaces and kissing scraped knees, and then suddenly, they're taller than you, asking for the keys to your car, and you realize you haven't had a real conversation with them in weeks. Not about grades, not about chores, about them, about who they are becoming. I remember once, my oldest, maybe 17 at the time, asked me what I was afraid of. I laughed it off, told him I wasn't afraid of much. But I was afraid he'd grow up and not know who I truly was. Not the provider, the man behind it. But I'd spent so many years hiding behind being strong. I didn't know how to step out anymore. I think he knew. Kids are smart like that. They feel your presence, even when your words are fine-tuned to misdirect. And one day they stop asking, not out of spite, just survival. They mirror what you model. And if you model absence masked as responsibility, well, that's what they learn to become. I don't say this to make you feel guilty. I say this because I've lived long enough to know regret isn't meant to punish us. It's meant to teach us. You can't go back and hold the moments you missed, but you can hold the ones that are still coming. I learned, too late maybe, but still in time, that intimacy is a daily invitation. Not grand, not cinematic, just choosing, each day, to show a little more of your real self, even when it feels small or strange. I started leaving little notes for my wife again, the way I used to when we were younger. Nothing elaborate, just things like, thank you for folding my socks, or, I missed you today. First, she thought something was wrong, but soon she began writing back. We built a quiet bridge, one word at a time, and for the first time in years, I felt not just loved, but seen. So if you're somewhere in the middle of your life, and you feel the walls tightening, the air thinning, the silence growing louder, I'll say this, let someone in, not to fix you, just to know you. Let love be clumsy. Let honesty be awkward. Let connection feel strange. It's worth it. Even now, when I sit by the window alone, with my memories as my only companions, I smile at those notes, at the hands that wrote them, at the days we almost lost but didn't. There's a stillness that comes after enough years have passed. A quiet understanding that not everything broken needs to be fixed. Some things just need to be witnessed. I didn't know that in my 40s. Back then, every silence felt like a problem. Every crack in my armor felt like failure. I spent too much time trying to patch up things that were never meant to be perfect. My body, my marriage, my sense of self. But life is not something to master. something to soften into. I wish I had learned that sooner. I spent a decade chasing productivity, measuring myself in tasks completed, hours worked, goals met. And yet, I can barely remember any of those to-do lists now. What I do remember is the afternoon I sat by the window and watched the rain fall for an hour without checking my phone. The way the light changed on the living room wall, the rhythm of raindrops against the roof. I remember the quiet and how rare it felt to be at peace with doing nothing. After 45, time begins to shift. Not in speed, but in texture. You start to feel it more. You notice the way a year can disappear in the space between tax seasons. The way your child's face changes seemingly overnight. The way your own hands begin to look like your father's. And with that awareness comes something that many of us don't speak of. Grief. Not grief for loss, though that comes too, but grief for time. For the years you rushed through. For the parts of yourself you left behind while chasing things that never truly mattered. For the friendships that faded, not from anger, but from neglect. I had a friend, Mark. We met in college, laughed over cheap beer and broken dreams. He was the kind of person who saw you without trying. And I let that friendship drift. Not on purpose. Just life, work, family, busyness. We kept saying, let's catch up sometime. Then one day I got a call. He was gone, just like that. And I remember thinking, how many people in my life do I love quietly, distantly, waiting for some time? That was the next quiet truth I faced in those middle years. That relationships don't sustain themselves on memory. They need tending. I started writing letters after that. Not long ones, not poetic, just small reminders to people I loved. I was thinking of you today. You crossed my mind while I was making coffee. Remember that road trip in '89? I still laugh about it. And something beautiful happened. Some of them wrote back. Others didn't. But that wasn't the point. The point was, I remembered how to reach. Because the truth is, men don't stop needing connection as they age. We just get quieter about it. We wait for others to make the first move. We pretend we're fine. We say, I'm good, when our hearts are full of questions we don't know how to ask. But even now, with a slower step and a softer voice, I'll tell you this, the ache to be known doesn't fade. It only grows more patient. I think in our younger years, we believe that wisdom comes from accumulating knowledge. But in truth, it comes from releasing it. Letting go of the idea that you have to be certain, that you have to be strong all the time, that your worth is tied to your usefulness. I had to unlearn so much. Unlearn the idea that slowing down meant giving up. Unlearn the belief that emotion was weakness. Unlearn the myth that my value came from how much I could carry. Now, in this 8th decade of mine, I carry less, but feel more. I cry more easily, not out of sadness, but beauty. A grandchild's laughter, the smell of bread in the oven, the way the wind moves through autumn leaves, whispering stories of seasons past. These things used to pass me by. Now they are everything. And I'll tell you something else. When I stopped trying to perform life, I began to participate in it. Not as a role, as a soul. There was a morning, I must have been 52, when I woke up and made pancakes for no reason. No birthday, no celebration, just a Tuesday, and I danced in the kitchen while flipping them. No music, just the rhythm of batter on the pan, and the sudden joy of choosing joy for its own sake. My wife laughed from the hallway. "Who are you today?" she asked. And for the first time in years, I answered honestly, "I think I'm me." You see, after all the crises, after the disconnection and fading and grief, there comes a moment when you realize you're still here, and being here, truly here, is enough. You don't need to impress anyone. You don't need to prove your relevance. You don't need to outrun your age. You just need to return to yourself. And once you do, everything changes. Even the ordinary becomes sacred. Even the silence begins to sing. I think the most surprising thing about growing older isn't the physical changes. Not really. It's the way time rewrites your definitions. What once felt urgent begins to soften. What once seemed distant, like mortality or meaning, becomes so close you can feel it brushing your skin, like sunlight through a curtain. In my late 40s and early 50s, I thought I was running out of time. Everything felt compressed. Like if I didn't get there soon, wherever there was, I'd miss the chance to matter. But now, sitting here at 80, I can tell you, I was never running out of time. I was running away from stillness. Because stillness is where the real questions live. And back then, I didn't feel ready to face them. Who am I when I'm not needed? Who am I when I'm not achieving? Who am I when the house is quiet and the children have grown and there's no one to impress but the man in the mirror? Those questions used to scare me. Now they feel like old friends. I sit with them each morning, coffee in hand, watching the birds pick at the seed I scatter just outside the window. They know me now, those birds, and I know them. We're creatures of habit, after all. I think that's the final truth that arrived with age. Not loudly, not as a revelation, but gradually, like snow falling on an old porch, that it's okay to slow down, that it's okay to take up space, without having to explain why. That presence matters more than productivity. I used to feel invisible, like the world had moved on, left me behind. But in truth, it was the first time in my life I'd had the space to truly see. I see how my hands have changed, not just aged, but softened. I see how the light in my living room shifts across the day, painting stories I never noticed before. I see how many ordinary moments I rushed past when I was younger, believing something bigger was waiting around the corner. Nothing was waiting. This quiet morning, this breath, this moment, is the thing. If you're watching this now, if you're somewhere in the thick of midlife, feeling a little lost, a little tired, maybe a little numb, I want you to know something. You're not broken. You're becoming. It doesn't always look like progress. Sometimes it looks like stillness. Sometimes it looks like confusion. Sometimes it looks like standing at the kitchen sink wondering where the last 10 years went. But becoming isn't always forward motion. Sometimes it's a return to the version of you who didn't perform, who wasn't guarded, who laughed too loud and cried when no one was looking and danced in kitchens just because the toast didn't burn that morning. He's still there, beneath the layers of responsibility and expectation and silence. He's still there, and it's never too late to go back for him. If I've learned anything in these 80 years, it's that healing doesn't happen all at once. It arrives in small, stubborn ways. A phone call you finally make, a song you listen to twice, a walk without your headphones, a hug you linger in, a story you share, even if your voice shakes. That's the beautiful thing about aging. The world finally quiets down enough for you to hear yourself again. And when you do, you realize the man you were always chasing wasn't somewhere out there. He was always here, waiting patiently, one quiet breath at a time. So, if you'd like to return, now and then, and sit with someone who remembers, someone who sees you, even in your quiet, you know where to find me. This space doesn't go anywhere, and neither do I. Not really. I'm here, waiting on the porch, coffee in hand. The birds are already singing.